Lena had always believed that the world moved too fast. People rushed from one place to another, always in a hurry, always distracted. She watched them from behind the counter of the restaurant where she worked, an elegant place filled with polished glass, soft lighting, and tables arranged like pieces of art. But none of that beauty ever belonged to her. She only walked around it, serving the people who enjoyed it. Every morning, before she left for work, she stood by the small window of her tiny apartment and looked down at the noisy street. She lived on the third floor of a worn-out building that always smelled like old paint and warm dust. Her room was barely big enough for a bed and a narrow table, but it was all she could afford. Her younger brother slept on a mattress beside her. She always put the blanket over him gently before leaving for her long shift. She didn't have much, but she had him, and that gave her strength. Her job wasn't easy. It was a place where wealthy businesspeople came to eat in silence, as if they were too important to show emotion. They talked about stocks, deals, and expensive trips, sipping drinks that cost more than what she earned in a day. But Lena never complained. She carried plates with steady hands and a quiet smile, even when her legs ached from standing too long. The restaurant had a grand piano placed near the front. It was the kind of piano that attracted attention even when no one was playing. It stood there like a glossy black jewel, catching the reflection of warm lights. On most evenings, a hired pianist would come and play soft music that made the restaurant feel magical. But today, the pianist had called in sick, and the piano sat in complete silence. Lena always felt something when she walked past it. She never touched it, but her heart always skipped a beat. The keys reminded her of a time when life was different, simpler, warmer. Her mother used to play a broken old keyboard they once had. The keys were chipped, and half of them didn't make a sound. But when her mother played, the house felt full. Music lived in those moments. It was the only escape they had. But life changed too fast. Her mother fell sick. Bills grew. They had to sell the keyboard. And the music that once filled their home disappeared like smoke in the wind. Lena never complained about any of it. She was too busy trying to survive, trying to keep the world from collapsing on her and her brother. Still, every time she passed that restaurant piano, something inside her whispered reminders of who she used to be. That day had started just like any other. Lena reached the restaurant early, tied her apron tightly around her waist, and began her shift. The place filled quickly. Men in suits gathered around tables. Women in expensive dresses whispered over their meals, and the sound of forks and glasses created the familiar rhythm of her day. Yet something felt different. Maybe it was the silence where the piano music usually played, or maybe it was the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders more heavily than usual. She had barely slept the night before. Rent was due. The electricity bill was overdue. Her brother needed new school shoes. Everything felt too heavy. At one point, while carrying a tray of drinks, Lena stopped for a moment near the piano. She didn't touch it. She just looked at it the way someone might look at an old friend they miss dearly. "You thinking of switching jobs?" one of the cooks joked as he passed by with a plate. She just smiled weakly and shook her head. She continued serving tables, moving between the aisles with careful steps. The wealthy diners didn't notice her tired eyes or the way she rubbed her hands to warm them whenever she got a moment. To them, she was another face doing her job, not a person with dreams or a story. Later that evening, a group of loud guests entered the restaurant. They were clearly from a higher circle, designer suits, shiny watches, and the kind of confidence that filled the entire room. They sat at the biggest table and ordered the most expensive items without even looking at the menu. Lena approached their table with the soft politeness she always carried. "Good evening. May I take your order?" she asked with a gentle voice. They barely looked at her. One of them waved a hand dismissively and said, "We've already ordered." She nodded and stepped back quietly. When their drinks arrived, she placed them one by one. They continued talking loudly, laughing about business deals and weekend parties. Their conversation echoed across the restaurant, capturing everyone's attention. Then one of the guests glanced at the empty piano stage. "No music today?" he asked loudly, not to Lena, but as if speaking to the air. "The pianist couldn't come," Lena replied politely as she placed a glass on their table. "Oh," he said, raising an eyebrow. "So what now?" Silence. His friends laughed. Another guest, already slightly tipsy, leaned back in his chair and smirked at Lena. "Why don't you play something?" he teased. "Come on, it would be fun. You look like you've got some hidden talent." Everyone laughed again, as if the idea itself was ridiculous. Lena froze. Her heart thumped once, hard. The words stung, not because he meant them as mockery, but because they brought back the one thing she had been trying to forget. The part of her that still wanted to play, the part that still dreamed. I don't know how to play," she said quietly, hoping to end the conversation. But the guests insisted. "Come on, just touch it. Let's see if you can make a sound." Her face flushed with embarrassment. She didn't want to create a scene. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to work and go home. The manager walked over, sensing the situation. He looked at Lena, then at the guests. He clearly didn't want to upset wealthy customers. He sighed and said quietly to her, "Just humor them for a moment. Don't worry. Just sit and touch a few keys." Lena swallowed, her throat tight. She felt small under the weight of their eyes. She didn't want to be laughed at, but refusing would cause trouble, and she couldn't afford that. With hesitant steps, she walked toward the piano. The room grew quieter, curiosity spreading like a ripple. She could feel dozens of eyes following her. Her palms felt sweaty. Her knees felt weak. She sat slowly on the cushioned bench. The piano felt too grand, too perfect, too sacred. She didn't deserve to touch it, at least that's what she believed. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She remembered her mother's hands, guiding hers when she was little. She remembered the broken keyboard, the melodies they made even when half the notes didn't work. She closed her eyes for a brief second. The guests watched with mocking smiles, expecting her to make a small sound and rush away. But something changed inside her. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the pressure of life, or the longing she had buried for years. Something cracked open, like a door she had kept locked for too long. She placed her fingers softly on the keys. The first sound was gentle, almost shy, but it was pure. She pressed another key, then another. Then, without planning to, without thinking, she began to play. A soft melody flowed out, one she had created years ago in the small living room of her childhood home. It was simple, emotional, full of memories. The sound filled the restaurant, replacing the noise and chatter. The guests at the loud table fell silent. Forks lowered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the manager's jaw dropped slightly. Lena didn't look up. She lost herself in the melody, her fingers moving with a grace she thought she had forgotten. The music wrapped around her like warmth after a long winter. For the first time in years, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't tired. She wasn't struggling. She was simply herself. A girl who loved music. A girl who once dreamed. And though she didn't know it yet, every person watching her play was realizing that the quiet waitress they ignored every day was far more than she seemed. When Lena opened her eyes, she didn't immediately understand why the restaurant felt different. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens when something unexpected takes place and everyone is trying to understand what they've just witnessed. Her fingers were still resting on the piano keys, trembling slightly. The last note she played lingered in the air, fading slowly like a soft whisper. She pulled her hands back and placed them gently on her lap, suddenly aware of where she was and what she had just done. Her heart pounded hard inside her chest. For a moment she didn't dare look up. She was afraid to see the looks on the guests' faces. Afraid she had done something wrong. Afraid the manager would scold her for embarrassing the restaurant. Afraid the wealthy customers would laugh again, but this time louder. But instead of laughter, she heard something else. Something she had never heard directed at her before. Clapping. Started softly, almost hesitant. Then it grew, spreading from one table to another until the entire restaurant was filled with applause. People stood up. A few even whistled. Someone at the back shouted, "Bravo!" Lena's throat tightened. She stared at her hands for another moment before lifting her gaze just enough to see the reaction. The loud table, the one that had teased her earlier, was no longer laughing. All of them looked stunned. One man's eyes were wide in disbelief. Another sat back in his chair, arms crossed but no trace of a smirk left on his face. The one who suggested she play something for fun looked the most shocked. His mouth was slightly open, as if he couldn't find words. Lena slowly stood up from the piano bench. She stepped away from the piano, unsure if she should bow, run, apologize, or pretend nothing had happened. She instinctively reached for her apron, smoothing it out even though there was no wrinkle to flatten. When she turned toward the tables, she saw faces she had served for months. Faces that had never looked at her with more than passing indifference. But now they were looking at her with a kind of warmth she wasn't used to. Her manager stood near the counter, staring at her like he had never seen her before. His eyes were round, and he didn't even blink when the applause continued. He looked as surprised as everyone else. A woman from one of the front tables approached her with careful steps. She wore a long shimmered dress and held a small clutch close to her side. She had the kind of presence that made people notice her without her having to say a word. Lena had served her before, always quietly and politely. "My dear," the woman said softly, "you were extraordinary." Lena lowered her head shyly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause." "Cause what?" the woman said with a gentle smile. "'Cause beauty? 'Cause emotion? Don't apologize for that." Her eyes glistened as if the music had touched something deep inside her. Before Lena could respond, someone else approached. A man in a dark suit, tall and well-groomed, stepped forward with a curious expression. He held a phone in his hand and stopped a respectful distance from her. "Do you teach music?" he asked. "Teach?" Lena repeated softly, confused. "No, I don't." He nodded thoughtfully. "You should. You play with emotion most trained musicians spend years trying to reach." She felt her cheeks warm. Compliments were rare in her life, and accepting them felt strange. More guests approached, asking questions. Where did she learn? Did she study music? Was she a performer before becoming a waitress? Did she have other pieces she could play? Lena tried to answer politely, but her voice kept breaking. Not out of fear, but because she wasn't used to so much attention. Not used to being seen. Then the restaurant quieted again, but this time for a different reason. A group of 3 guests stepped forward from the main table, the table that had teased her earlier. They were dressed more elegantly than everyone else, and their manner carried a sense of authority. One of them was a man with silver hair and sharp eyes that gave away experience and confidence. He approached slowly, his hands in his pockets. "That was impressive," he said, his voice calm and deep. "You've been hiding talent under an apron all this time?" Lena pressed her hands together. "I wasn't hiding. I haven't played in a long time." "How long?" he asked. She swallowed. "Years." His eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. He exchanged a look with the 2 people behind him, one woman and another man, both clearly influential in their circles. "You have a natural gift," he said. "Where did you train?" "I didn't train," Lena said. "My mother taught me when I was younger. We had a small keyboard. It wasn't in good shape, but we played on it anyway. We sold it when times got difficult." The man listened quietly. The woman beside him gently touched his arm, urging him to continue the conversation warmly. "I see," he said thoughtfully. "Well, your mother taught you well." Lena nodded but didn't trust herself to speak. It was too overwhelming. Too much happening too fast. Then the manager stepped beside her, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Well," he said, "that was unexpected. Very unexpected." Lena immediately felt nervous again. She waited for him to say she had done something wrong. But instead he straightened his tie and continued. "But in a good way. In a very good way." His voice trembled a little, as if he was unsure how to handle the sudden spotlight on his restaurant. The silver-haired man's attention shifted from Lena to the manager. "You should consider hiring her as your pianist," he said, half teasing, half serious. "It would certainly bring more people here." The manager let out a nervous laugh. Ah, well, she's one of our best waitresses. But we can discuss it. Lena felt her heart leap into her throat. She didn't want to lose her job, but the idea of playing the piano again, even part-time, filled her with a warmth she had forgotten she could feel. But she also felt scared. Scared to hope, scared to dream again. The applause slowly faded as people returned to their seats, still talking about her performance. Some pulled out their phones, watching the short clips they had recorded. Lena saw her own face on a small screen as someone replayed the moment she pressed the first key. Seeing herself from someone else's perspective made her feel like she was living outside her own body. It didn't feel real. The manager finally motioned for her to follow him to the back room. As soon as the door closed, the noise of the restaurant softened. Lena stood quietly in front of him, not knowing what to expect. He leaned on the counter and let out a long breath. I don't even know what to say, he admitted. That was unbelievable. I'm sorry if I caused trouble, she murmured. They told me to play, and I didn't want anyone to be upset. I just played a little, and then, no, he interrupted. You didn't cause trouble. You impressed everyone. He rubbed his forehead, still stunned. Including people we definitely want to impress. Lena didn't know what he meant by that, but she didn't want to question it. You should go on break, he said finally. Take a moment. You look like you need it. She nodded and quietly left the back room. Instead of going outside, she returned to the small staff corridor and leaned against the wall. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat still racing. Everything felt unreal. The applause, the compliments, the looks of admiration. It was all too much to take at once. She slid down slowly until she was sitting on the floor. Her hands shook lightly. She wasn't scared. She was overwhelmed. For years, she had worked quietly, invisible to the world, unnoticed. And in just a few minutes, everything changed. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the memory of the music settle inside her. She hadn't played for anyone in so long. Not since her mother had passed away. Not since the keyboard was sold. Not since responsibility had replaced dreams. But today the music returned. It returned with a force she didn't expect. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the sudden moment would lead to anything or if it would simply become a memory she cherished. But for the first time in a long time, Lena felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. She slowly stood up and walked back to the main hall, not knowing that the night was far from over, and that her life was already beginning to change in ways she could never imagine. When Lena stepped back into the restaurant, she expected everything to feel normal again, but the room was still buzzing with the energy her music had created. People were talking in low voices, turning their heads to look at her as she quietly returned to her spot near the service counter. She wasn't used to attention. In fact, she had spent years moving through life trying not to attract any at all. But now, she felt dozens of eyes following her every step. She straightened her apron, hoping it would make her feel grounded. Her hands were still a little shaky, and her breath came unevenly, but she forced herself to move with calmness. One of her co-workers approached her with wide eyes. "What was that?" he whispered in disbelief. "You never said you could play like that." She offered a small, shy smile. "I didn't know I still could." "Well," he said, shaking his head, "you just turned this whole place upside down." Lena didn't know how to respond. She just nodded slightly and tried to focus on her work, but customers kept calling her over. Not for food, but to congratulate her, to ask questions, to gush about the performance. It was overwhelming. She forced herself to smile politely, even though her emotions were a tangled knot inside her. She wasn't used to praise. She didn't know where to place it inside herself. At one point, the silver-haired man who had spoken to her earlier raised a hand, signaling her to approach. His table sat near the center of the restaurant, and his presence alone seemed to command attention. The woman and man seated with him watched her with kind, thoughtful expressions. When she reached the table, he leaned forward slightly. "You said your mother taught you?" he asked. "Yes," Lena replied softly. "And after she passed, you stopped playing?" She nodded. Why? He asked gently. She hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should reveal the truth, but something in his expression made her feel safe enough to try. Life got harder, she said. I had to work. I had to take care of my brother. I didn't have an instrument anymore, and I didn't think anyone wanted to hear me play. The silver-haired man looked at her with a seriousness that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. Well, he said slowly, we heard you tonight, and we want to hear you again. His words sank into her chest like warm sunlight. The woman at the table spoke next. Have you ever thought of performing? Even just casually? Your playing feels emotional, real. It reaches people. Lena shook her head. I've never performed before. Not like this. You should consider it, the woman replied. There is something rare in the way you play. The younger man at the table added, talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden in a restaurant. Hearing that made Lena's stomach flutter with a strange mix of fear and hope. Hidden talent. She had heard that phrase before in stories, but she never imagined someone would say it about her. Before she could reply, the silver-haired man leaned back and studied her carefully. Do you know who we are? She blinked, confused. No, I'm sorry. The woman smiled warmly. Don't apologize. That makes you even more genuine. The man continued, I work with artists, musicians, creators. I help new talent find direction. He paused before adding, I think you could have a future in music if you want one. Lena's breath caught in her throat. A future in music? The idea felt too big, too impossible. But the way he said it made it sound like something within reach. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know anything about the music world. I've never even played for a real audience. You just did, the woman said gently. And you moved all of them. A warm wave spread across Lena's chest. She wanted to believe them, but her mind immediately drifted to her responsibilities. Rent, bills, her brother, their unstable life. Dreams were beautiful, but they didn't pay for groceries or school clothes. Still, the thought lingered. The silver-haired man reached into his coat and pulled out a small card. He placed it on the table in front of her. If you ever want to talk, he said, about music, opportunities, or simply about your talent, call this number. His voice softened. No pressure, no promises you're not ready for. Only a chance to dream again. Lena stared at the card. It looked simple, but something about it felt heavy, like it carried a different kind of weight. A weight she wasn't sure she was ready to hold. She bowed her head slightly. Thank you, really. He nodded. After that, she returned to her shift, but working felt different. Every step she took felt lighter, as if the music had unlocked a part of her she didn't know was still alive. People continued congratulating her. One couple said her performance reminded them of their wedding song. Another diner said the melody made him think about his late mother. Someone else said they felt calm for the first time that week. It amazed her how something she thought was buried inside her could affect people so deeply. She didn't perform to impress anyone. She had simply felt something and allowed herself to express it. Later in the evening, another moment surprised her. A young girl, maybe around 10 years old, approached shyly, holding her father's hand. Excuse me, the girl whispered. Are you the girl who played the piano? Lena smiled gently. Yes. The girl looked up at her with bright eyes. Your music made me happy. I want to learn piano now. Something inside Lena melted. She knelt so she could meet the girl at eye level. You should, she said softly. Music is a beautiful friend. It will always stay with you. The girl smiled as if Lena had given her a gift. The father nodded gratefully before guiding his daughter back to their table. Moments like that made the evening feel even more unreal. Toward the end of the night, when things finally quieted down, Lena found herself alone near the piano again. She sat on the bench for just a moment, letting her fingers lightly trace the keys without pressing them. She didn't play. She simply sat there, thinking. She remembered sitting at her old keyboard as a child, her legs too short to reach the ground, listening to her mother hum softly while teaching her the keys. She remembered the joy of making sounds that turned into music, the comfort it brought during difficult times. She missed that feeling. But tonight, for the first time in years, she felt it again. And it scared her how much she wanted more of it. The manager walked up behind her. "You okay?" She turned slightly. "I think so." He folded his arms. "They're still talking about you. Even in the kitchen." Lena lowered her gaze shyly. "I didn't expect anything like this." "Neither did I," he admitted. "But listen, if you ever want to play again, even just for a few minutes before your shift or after closing, you can. I won't stop you." Her eyes widened with surprise. "Really?" He nodded. "Just don't tell the pianist," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. She actually laughed. A small, genuine laugh that felt good leaving her chest. "Thank you," she said. She stood up, giving the piano a final glance before returning to her tasks. When the restaurant finally closed and she stepped outside, the air felt crisp and different. She breathed it in deeply, feeling like the world smelled sweeter, lighter. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass door behind her. For a moment, she studied herself. Not as a tired waitress, not as someone struggling to make it through each day, but as someone who had surprised an entire room with nothing more than her heart and a melody. She walked home slowly, letting her thoughts swirl freely. Her brother was probably asleep by now, curled under the blanket she always tucked around him. She couldn't wait to tell him what happened, but another part of her wondered if telling him would make it feel too real. As she walked, she kept replaying the silver-haired man's words. "You could have a future in music, if you want one." She didn't know if she deserved such a future. She didn't know if she was brave enough to reach for it. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine it. A future where she wasn't invisible. A future where her hands touched keys more than plates. A future shaped by music, not struggle. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she would ever call the number on the card resting in her apron pocket. But one thing was certain. Her life had already begun to change. And deep inside her, a small spark, once forgotten, was glowing again. The next morning, Lena woke up before the sun. The apartment was cold, the kind of cold that made her pull the thin blanket around her shoulders before getting out of bed. She looked at her younger brother sleeping, his face calm, unaware of the whirlwind that had happened the night before. For a moment, she stood there watching him, and something inside her softened. She wanted the world for him, more than she ever had for herself. She brushed a gentle hand over his hair, the same way she did every morning, and whispered a quiet promise she had repeated many times. "I'll make things better." But that morning those words felt different, more possible, less empty. She quietly got dressed for work, tying her apron around her waist before leaving the apartment. The streets outside were still quiet, the sky painted with the early colors of dawn. The cool air made her breathe in deeper, and for the first time in a long time, the walk to work didn't feel heavy. She kept replaying the previous night in her mind. The applause, the shocked faces, the compliments, the card the silver-haired man had given her. She hadn't taken it out of her apron pocket yet, almost afraid that touching it would make all of it unreal. When she reached the restaurant, she stepped inside expecting everything to look the same. But the cooking staff looked at her differently. The servers smiled at her in a way they never had before. Even the kitchen noise felt warmer. "Good morning, superstar," one coworker teased gently, handing her a stack of clean menus. She blushed. "Please don't start with that." "Too late," he said. "Everyone's talking about you." She didn't want attention, but she couldn't deny the small happiness that came with knowing people saw her. Really saw her. As she moved through the morning tasks, wiping tables, polishing glasses, setting up cutlery, she felt lighter. Her steps seemed softer, her thoughts warmer. Then, just before opening time, the manager called her over. "We need to talk," he said. Lena's stomach flipped. She immediately thought she was in trouble. Maybe customers had complained that a waitress shouldn't be touching the piano, or maybe the owners disliked what happened. But the manager wasn't angry. He looked unsure, and maybe even nervous. "Last night was, well, it was something," he began. "I didn't expect any of it." None of us did. She nodded quietly. He scratched the back of his head. I talked to the owner this morning. They saw the videos people posted. And they want to try something. What do they want to try? She asked softly. They want you to play again tonight. Not a full performance. Just a few minutes. Maybe 1 or 2 pieces. The idea is, it might bring more customers. He shifted awkwardly. But only if you want to. Lena blinked. Play again? She whispered. He nodded. The applause that filled the room still echoed in her mind long after she stepped off the small stage area. She felt light, almost floating, as if the entire moment had been unreal. The rich guests, the shining piano, the disbelief in their eyes. Everything felt like a dream she wasn't prepared for. But the moment she walked into the hallway, the cool air touched her face, reminding her that it was all real. She really had played in front of those people, and they had loved it. She leaned her back against the wall, trying to calm her racing breath. It was strange. She had faced rough days, long shifts, rude customers, and hopeless thoughts. Yet nothing had made her heart beat like this. Not fear, something else. Something warm that she hadn't felt in years. As she stood there, one of the servers from the kitchen rushed to her side, eyes wide with excitement. What was that? He whispered loudly. I didn't know you could even play the piano. She smiled softly, still trying to process everything. I didn't expect to play today, she admitted. I don't know. I just heard the music in my mind and went with it. He shook his head in awe. They're still talking about you in there. You should see their faces. She looked down at her hands, the same hands she used to scrub dishes, carry trays, and wipe tables. Tonight they had done something different, something her heart had been missing. Before she could speak again, the manager stormed down the hallway. She froze for a moment, thinking she might get scolded. Maybe she wasn't supposed to touch the piano. Maybe she had overstepped. Her smile faded. But the manager stopped in front of her and let out a breath as if he had been searching for her everywhere. They want you back, he said. For what? She asked quietly. I didn't do anything that special. He blinked at her. Not special? You stopped the entire room. They want to talk to you. Some of them are very important guests. Go. Her stomach tightened, but not from fear. It was something she couldn't fully name. Maybe hope. Maybe disbelief. Maybe both. She followed him back into the hall. As soon as she stepped inside, a few guests turned and looked toward her. Their expressions were no longer filled with criticism or arrogance. They looked curious, almost impressed. One of the older gentlemen raised a hand gently, signaling for her to come closer. She walked towards their table, unsure of what to expect. The man stood up slowly, smiling in a warm, respectful way she hadn't experienced from customers before. My dear, he said in a calm voice. Where did you learn to play like that? She hesitated. I learned by listening, she said honestly. We didn't have a piano at home, but whenever I heard music, I memorized the sound and tried to play it whenever I found an old piano somewhere. The table exchanged glances, surprised, impressed, confused. You mean you were never trained? Another woman asked. She shook her head. No, I always wanted to learn, but lessons were expensive. I worked most of the time. Life just didn't go the way I hoped. She laughed softly, embarrassed she had revealed too much. Another guest, a younger man with a serious expression, leaned forward. You played like someone who has been trained for years. That wasn't simple memorization. That was emotion. You can't teach that. Her cheeks warmed. Compliments like this weren't something she was used to receiving. I didn't know anyone was listening, she said. I just played what I felt. The woman beside the older man pointed her finger gently. That's exactly why it sounded so real, so honest. People who play only to show off never move hearts. You did. She didn't know what to say. For a moment, she wondered if she should apologize for touching the piano. But the older man spoke first. You shouldn't waste a gift like that, he said. Tell us, Why are you working here? Why not pursue music? His question felt like a knife and a hug at the same time. She looked at her hands again, trying not to let her frustration show. I needed money, she said quietly. Rent, food, bills. And dreams, well, dreams don't pay those. I had to work. The older man nodded slowly. Yes, life does that. But sometimes, talent appears in unexpected places. And it deserves a chance. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean? He exchanged a glance with the others at the table, and it was clear they had already discussed something before she came back. We want to help you, the woman said softly. If you're willing. Her heart skipped a beat. Help me? Why? Because gifts like yours are rare, the younger man said. We used to think talent belonged only to the wealthy, the privileged, the trained. But you proved something tonight. You reminded us what pure music sounds like. She felt her throat tighten. She didn't expect any of this. She didn't even want anything from them. She only played because her heart begged her to. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, the woman said simply. Say yes to the opportunity you deserve. Before she could answer, one of the waiters approached her with a worried look. Sorry, he said gently. But she still has tables to serve. The kitchen is waiting for the orders. Her heart dropped. Reality hit her. She was still a waitress, still working, still responsible for the shift. She stepped back slightly in embarrassment. I'm sorry, she said to the guests. I have to finish my work. But the older man raised a hand. No, not tonight. Tonight, let us speak with the manager. She stood still as they waved the manager over. The room felt like it was spinning slowly around her. The manager came quickly, bowing slightly to the guests. Yes, how can I help? She won't be serving tonight, the older man said. We need to speak with her. The manager looked startled but nodded nervously. Of course, absolutely. She shook her head quickly. No, please, I don't want to cause trouble. I still have work to. The woman touched her arm gently. You gave them something tonight. Now let them give something back. The manager excused himself, leaving her standing with the group. She didn't know what to think. It all felt like too much. The older man pulled a small card from his pocket and placed it into her hand. This is my contact. I run a foundation that supports young musicians. We sponsor training, instruments, and even living expenses for selected talent. I want you to apply. No, actually, I want you to join. Her breath caught. She stared at the card as if it were something magical. Me? She whispered. But I'm just. You're not just anything, the woman said firmly. You're someone with a voice the world should hear. She felt tears build up behind her eyes, but she tried to blink them away. She hadn't cried in front of strangers since she was a kid. But something inside her softened. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know if I deserve this, but thank you. The older man smiled gently. You deserve much more. They invited her to sit with them for a moment. She did, still unsure, still overwhelmed, but slowly letting herself breathe. They talked to her about her life, her struggles, her dreams, and her past. They listened not like customers but like people who genuinely cared. By the end of the conversation, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the tiny spark she kept hidden inside her. Not the shaky hope that came and went. But real hope, warm, steady, possible. When she finally stood to leave, the woman stopped her again. Remember, she said softly, talent speaks when the world tries to silence it. Tonight you spoke. She walked back toward the hallway, but this time her steps felt lighter, almost joyful. She knew her life hadn't changed yet, but something had shifted, something important. For the first time in a long time, she felt like her future might be bigger than the walls of the restaurant, bigger than the long shifts, bigger than the struggle. She placed her hand over the card in her pocket and smiled to herself. Maybe life wasn't done surprising her yet. When she got home that night, she didn't switch on the light right away. She stood at the door, fingers still touching the small card in her pocket, as if it were something fragile. Her tiny apartment felt colder than usual, but for once, the emptiness didn't make her feel small. She closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and let out a slow breath. It had all happened so fast. The piano, the applause, the rich guests talking to her, the offer she never expected. It felt like her heart was still on that stage, playing the last note, waiting for something she didn't know how to name. She finally turned on the light and walked toward the small table near the window. She placed the card down carefully, almost like it was a piece of gold. She stared at the name printed on it, the title, the contact numbers. A foundation, a place that helped musicians, a place that saw value in her. She sank into the chair and covered her face with both hands. She wasn't crying, but she felt something warm pulling at her chest, something she had buried a long time ago. Dreams. She whispered to herself, "Is this real?" But the empty room didn't answer. Her phone buzzed beside her. She looked at the screen and saw a message from a coworker. "You were amazing today. I can't believe we work with someone like you." She smiled faintly. Another message followed. "They're still talking about you. The whole staff is shocked." She placed the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. All her life, she had been told to focus on reality, that dreams were just stories people told themselves to feel better. She never had anyone pushing her, guiding her, or telling her she was worth something. But tonight, strangers, wealthy, powerful strangers, looked at her like she carried something special. She finally stood up, grabbed the card again, and placed it on the tiny shelf above her bed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt something new in her chest, something bold. She fell asleep with that feeling. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual. Her mind felt rested in a way she hadn't felt for months. She took a shower, tied her hair back, and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. For the first time, she didn't see the tired waitress. She saw the girl who played the piano and made rich people stop talking. She smiled a little at the thought. She changed into her work uniform and walked to the restaurant. The air outside felt fresher, the sky a little brighter. Or maybe she was imagining it. But even imagination felt good today. When she walked into the restaurant, people looked at her differently. Not with pity, not with annoyance, something else. Some smiled, some whispered, some stared in surprise. One of the cooks leaned out from the kitchen. "Hey," he called. "Are you famous now, or what?" She laughed softly. "Not even close. Could have fooled us," he said, shaking his head. "Everyone saw you last night. Even the owner heard." Her smile faded slightly. "The owner?" He nodded. "Yeah. He said he wants to talk to you." She felt her stomach tighten. She hoped she wasn't in trouble. She went to the back office where the owner was waiting. He looked up from his desk when she knocked. "There you are," he said. "Come in." She stepped inside quietly. He didn't look angry, which was a relief. He leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment. Then he said, "I heard what happened last night." She looked down, unsure of what he thought about it. "First," he said, "I want to tell you something important. You didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you brought attention to this restaurant in a way nobody expected." She blinked. "I did." He nodded. "Those guests were impressed. Some of them spoke to me personally. They said your music was the best part of their evening." She felt her face warm with embarrassment, but also with pride. "I'm really glad," she said softly. "I didn't plan it. I know," he said, "but sometimes accidents are blessings. And last night, that piano wasn't just decoration. You made it come alive." She didn't know how to respond. "But listen," he continued, "if this opportunity with the foundation is real, you should follow it." Her eyes lifted. "You think so?" He nodded seriously. "People like us. We work hard, we struggle, we fight for every little thing. We don't get many chances. When one comes, you hold on to it." She looked at her hands. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he said honestly. "Because good workers are hard to find." They both laughed softly. Then he added, "But seriously, go after it. You have my support. And your job will still be here if you ever want to come back." Her heart felt full. She nodded gratefully. Thank you. Really. After she left the office, she felt lighter again. She went through her shift with a small smile on her face, noticing the tiny changes. Customers seemed kinder today, or maybe she just noticed kindness more because her heart wasn't weighed down. During her break, she stepped outside and pulled out the card again. She stared at the number. Her hands trembled a little. She didn't know what she would say. What if they changed their mind? What if she misunderstood everything? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she called. The phone rang only once before someone answered. Hello? A warm voice said. She swallowed. Hi. I'm the girl who played the piano yesterday. Oh. The woman on the other end said with excitement. I'm so glad you called. We hoped you would. Her throat tightened. I wasn't sure if the offer was real. It's very real, the woman assured her. The director was waiting for your call. He wants to meet you. She felt her knees weaken. Meet me? When? Today, if you're available. She glanced back toward the restaurant. She still had 2 hours left in her shift. But the owner's words echoed in her mind. When chances come, hold on to them. She took another deep breath. Yes, she said. I'm available. Wonderful. I'll send you the address. They ended the call, and she stood there for a moment, letting everything settle. She walked back inside and approached the owner. Can I leave 2 hours early today? She asked softly. He didn't question it. He simply nodded. Go. She changed out of her uniform quickly, grabbed her bag, and headed out the door. The address wasn't far, but she took a bus to save time. During the ride, she kept looking out the window, watching the city blur past her. Her mind raced. What would they say? What if she wasn't good enough? What if they realized she didn't know how to read music? What if they regretted inviting her? She squeezed her hands together and whispered to herself, just breathe. When she reached the building, she stood in front of it for a long moment. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it had a calm, warm presence, like a place built for people with dreams. She walked inside. The receptionist greeted her with a smile. You must be the pianist from last night. She laughed nervously. I guess so. Right this way, the receptionist said. They guided her into a bright room where the older man from last night was waiting. He stood as soon as she entered. There you are, he said kindly. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me, she said, her voice small but sincere. He motioned for her to sit. I want to hear you play again, he said. Not because I doubt you, but because I want to understand your style better. Music schools teach technique, but soul is something else. She nodded, though her heart pounded. Okay. He led her to another room. Piano sat in the center, simple, polished, waiting. She sat down, placing her fingers gently on the keys. She closed her eyes. Then she played. Not to impress anyone. Not to prove anything. She played for herself. For the girl who had been silent for too long. For the girl who cleaned floors instead of touching keys. For the girl who hid her dreams in the corners of her heart. She didn't realize she was crying until one of her tears hit a key. When she finished, she sat still, hands trembling. The older man wiped his eyes discreetly. My dear, he whispered, you don't need lessons to feel music, but you deserve the world to hear you. She looked up, unsure of what he meant. I want to offer you a full scholarship, he said gently. Training, support, everything you need. If you want it, it's yours. Her breath stopped. Then her tears came again. But this time they felt like hope.